Thanks very much, Stephen. As I say, it's customary for the CEDA Chairman to say a few words about the organisation at our annual dinner. Let me add my welcome to you all, and especially our trustees and sponsors who have made such a great contribution to CEDA, and to Martin Ferguson, our newest member of the Board of Governors and a personal friend and a great contributor over the years. Tim Pallas, who has taken time out of this busiest of time in the middle of the election campaign, and we're grateful for your participation. And we're especially appreciative of the contribution made again by our guest of honour, Glenn Stevens, and also Glenn for the various other ways in which you and the Reserve Bank have been supportive of us. It's been a great honour to be National Chairman of CEDA for the past 6 years and to have worked with so many able and committed people on such a worthy venture. A highlight of my time has been to preside over our 50th anniversary. CEDA was formed 54 years ago. I note that since its formation, it has maintained its purpose largely unchanged, to bring government, business and academia together so the best and brightest at the highest level can consider and promote ideas for Australia's economic and social development. A glance at our annual report on our website will show you the quality of our leadership on our National Board, our Board of Governors, the network of leading policy researchers and thinkers on our Council of Economics and Policy, and last but no least, the 5 state advisory councils across the country. It's a phenomenal network of very committed and very capable people. And all this work is supported by a talented and committed staff under the enthusiastic leadership of Stephen Martin. And Stephen, I'm sure all here would like to express their appreciation for the great work that you and they have been doing. And I must say personally, I've very much enjoyed working with your staff and in particularly with you, Stephen, and acknowledge the great work that you are doing. Today we've reluctantly accepted the retirement from the board of Ian Satchwell, who's been Chair of the West Australian Advisory Council, and as a result of our new fixed-term policy, CEDA is losing from the board Professor Glenn Withers after 6 years. Glenn's been a major link between the organisation and our academic community. He's served as Chair of our Board of Economics and Policy Economics and Policy Committee and our Council on Economics and Policy, and he's made a terrific contribution. I'm pleased to announce, however, that the AGM has elected worthy replacements. One is John Langerland, a prominent West Australian leader, former head of the West Australian Treasury, former Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, a company chairman, and he will take on the role as Chairman of the West Australian State Advisory Council. Another is Professor Rod Maddock, whose CV includes senior roles in banking and public service, being Chief Economist at the BCA. His distinguished academic career in several universities sees him now as Vice-Chancellor's Fellow at Victorian University. He has also been Head of the Economic Policy for Victorian Cabinet Office. We have worked very hard to try and link our significant research agenda, which you've heard about, with our thought leadership forums around the country and to link those. You've seen from the video some of those policy areas. But I'd like to dwell on a couple of those areas where we've undertaken and published research and linked that with a series of discussions around the country. For another audience, I took on the role of writing about the current spate of books about the last couple of years in Australian politics. My intention was to read them all until I found, would you believe, 30 of them, not counting long-published essays and serious academic literature. 13 were written by former politicians. Not all, but many of those were attempting to follow Churchill, who said, "History will be kind to me because I intend to write it." 15 were written by commentators and academics, and 2 were novels by gallery journalists, not very thinly veiling the identities and carryings on of some of the prominent people in the Canberra mob. But these stories written by and large were not complementary. Overwhelmingly from this material comes confirmation of the view that the state of politics and public discourse is at an all-time low and that good policy development is not being well served by what has been going on. In full focus has been the triumph of focus group over evidence-based policy, short-termism, the demand for announceables to feed a 24-hour news cycle, straw man and verballing tactics to denigrate ideas not invented here. There's criticism of broken promises. To my mind, a larger problem is over-promising for short-term political advantage in the first place. I could go on and on about this, as many of these authors in these books have done. Of course, this is not entirely new. I was in the officials' box in the old Parliament House when Billy McMahon leaned across the dispatch boxes and looked at Gough Whitlam, actually in the navel because that was such was the height differential, and said, and I quote, "Politics is staying in office." I wrote a report on the media and government for a Coombs Royal Commission into the public administration as far back as 1976, in which I argued all but a few journalists should be kicked out of Parliament House so they could concentrate on real policy debates rather than on the trivia of the daily brawling they were focusing on. So it's not entirely new, but we recently seem to have got to a particularly low ebb. This got to a point where most policy discussions in our Board of Governors meetings and other meetings and councils invariably got bogged down, so not so much on the policy issues we were discussing, but on the deficiencies in the political decision-making. Consequent discussion led us to produce our document, The Setting of Public Policy, in which a number of former state and federal political leaders and public service chiefs deemed to have been successful with difficult reform explained the reasons for their success and the reasons for failure. Their advice included taking on long-term perspectives, avoiding short-term political advantage by being consistent, including agreeing with opponents when they're on your agenda. It was being prepared to sell the case for unpopular reform. It was respect and effective use of the public service, and it was said to require discipline in government and decision-making processes. It's a shame that these leaders who shared concern about the current policy environment felt that they had to pointedly make these obvious points. Our latest report, entitled A Federation for the 21st Century, was developed because the issue came out strongly as our trustees and state advisory councils put it at the top of their agenda. The report argued for a constructive debate, including on who should be doing what, how things should be coordinated in a world so different to that when the Constitution was formed. CEDA led constructive discussions around the country, but we were disappointed, although I suppose not surprised, to find that despite significant commonality of views on substantive issues between the parties, debate was quickly hijacked by an opportunist focus on short-term political gain around the issue of GST. Again, we discussed this in our board today, and we're determined to get the Federation debate back on the core issues next year so that the taxation and financing issues will not block out consideration of a more rational allocation of tasks and responsibilities. In these and other areas, it's CEDA's mission and our proper role to pursue long-term hard questions, place neglected issues on the agenda, bring the best minds together to consider them, and inform discussions with objective, non-partisan advice and evidence. I've often quoted the former British Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Jim Hacker, who said, it's the people's will, I am their leader, I must follow them. In light of this political propensity currently, we hope to educate the people's will, and in doing so help create demand pull for better policy, or at least help minimise the loss of political capital for those leaders who are prepared to be braver in pursuit of difficult reforms. Finally, I'd like to say how grateful I am to have had the privilege of involvement at this level in CEDA over the past 6 years, and to thank so many of you who, through your encouragement, your guidance, and most of all your forbearance, have made it so enjoyable for me. As my last act of National Chairman, I'm pleased to announce, drum roll, that following his election to the board at the AGM today, Paul McClintock AO is to be my successor as National Chairman of CEDA. A round of applause for Paul accepting this. As I told the board today, my enthusiasm for Paul's appointment reflects my commitment to continuous improvement. When I was asked by the board to approach Paul with this idea, I knew how busy he is. But I was also optimistic, knowing Paul's regard for our organisation reflected in past contributions as Governor and frequent presenter at our activities. I was also aware from the early days that his father, Sir Eric McClintock, was amongst the foundation fathers of CEDA. Paul is perfectly placed for this role with experience at the most senior levels in business and government. In government, his roles included Secretary to Cabinet and Head of the Cabinet Policy Unit, reporting directly to the Prime Minister, and in this role he was the Prime Minister's most senior personal advisor on strategic directions in policy formation. More recently, he's been Chairman of the COAG Reform Council and a variety of other organisations, including Chairman of Medibank Private and a Director of a number of other boards and advisory bodies. Currently he's Chairman of Maya, TELUS Australia, New South Wales Ports and IMED, and again is active in as leader in a number of other organisations. Paul, the board and all of the CEDA community is grateful that you're able to take this on, and I'm sure you will lead this organisation to even greater distinction. I'd like, now it's a great pleasure as my final act as National Chairman of CEDA to call on your new Chairman, Paul McClintock, to say a few words.